The first thing the observer notices is the clipboard. Not the accident. Not the lights. The clipboard. It appears before the sirens finish settling into their rhythm, carried by a man who does not run. He walks with the careful economy of someone who expects space to open for him. The clipboard is clean. No bent corner, no coffee ring. A pen clipped to the top, aligned. The observer is standing on the sidewalk, close enough to smell warm rubber but far enough to be unassigned. Not a witness, not a victim, not staff. Just present. That is usually how these things begin, with people deciding who counts. The man with the clipboard does not ask what happened. He asks for names. He asks softly. Behind him, blue and red light moves across the storefront glass like slow water. The observer watches it pass over a display of phones charging in neat rows, the reflections flickering as if the devices themselves are blinking awake. The crash is already past. What remains is procedure. A patrol car door closes with a padded sound. Another stays open, engine idling. The officer leaning against it is relaxed in a way the observer has learned to recognize, not bored, not alert, but suspended. Waiting for instruction that will not come from the radio. The car involved is dark, expensive, and intact enough to look offended. Its hazard lights tick calmly, keeping time. Someone has closed all the doors. Someone else has already removed personal items, an overnight bag, a jacket folded once, then again. Nothing spills. The observer notices how quickly the street becomes narrower. A cone appears where there was none. Yellow tape arrives without urgency and is tied neatly to a parking meter, then adjusted so the knot faces away from the camera phone held by a man who is already being asked, gently, to step back. "Thank you," the voice says. "We'll take care of it from here." Who is we is not yet clear. The wealthy individual is not immediately visible. That is the second thing the observer notices. In ordinary accidents, the center is obvious. Here, the center has been moved. People orbit an absence. A woman in a tailored coat stands near the curb, phone to her ear, nodding as though listening to instructions only she can hear. She says very little. When she does speak, it is not about the accident. It is about logistics. "Yes," she says. "Yes, now. I'll stay." She looks at the clipboard man and inclines her head. He nods back. The exchange is brief, complete. An ambulance is present, but its lights are dimmed. Its back doors remain closed. A paramedic steps down, stretches his shoulders, and checks his watch. He does not hurry. He is not asked to. The observer thinks of other nights, other scenes, raised voices, hands shaking, someone repeating the same sentence too loudly. Here, the air feels padded. Sound seems absorbed by the coats, the glass, the deliberate spacing between bodies. A uniformed officer approaches the observer, then stops halfway, redirected by a glance from the clipboard man. The officer changes course smoothly, as if this had been the plan all along. The observer realizes they are being categorized. They step slightly to one side, testing the boundary. No one stops them. That, too, is information. Across the street, a security SUV idles with tinted windows. It was not here at first. The observer is certain of that. It has arrived quietly, merging into the scene as if it belongs to the infrastructure, like a fire hydrant or a lamppost. A hand appears at the rear door of the damaged car. Not frantic. Not injured. Just deliberate. The wealthy individual steps out. There is no announcement. No one says their name. No one needs to. They are dressed casually, expensively, as though the night had been planned. They pause, take in the scene, then look not at the damage, but at the people. Their gaze passes over the observer without stopping. A man steps forward immediately, not an officer. He says, "We're just going to get you out of the way." Out of the way of what, the observer wonders. The accident is already still. The wealthy individual nods once and is guided, not escorted, toward the SUV. Someone opens the door before they reach it. Someone else closes it behind them. The observer notices that no questions are asked. A second clipboard appears. This one is thinner. It is handed to an officer, who flips it open and scans the first page. He does not write anything. He does not look at the car again. Another officer speaks quietly into a radio, using phrases that sound rehearsed: minor incident, no immediate issues, coordinating. The observer hears their own phone vibrate. A message from no one important. They silence it instinctively, suddenly aware of how noise is being managed. A man in a vest approaches a small group near the crosswalk. "If you saw anything," he says, smiling faintly, "we'll get your information in just a moment." He gestures toward a coffee shop that has already turned off its music. Inside, a clerk stands frozen behind the counter, receipt printer humming uselessly. "Inside might be more comfortable," the man adds. "It's cold." Comfort, the observer thinks, has arrived early. The clerk unlocks the door for them, even though the sign says closed. The observer steps in with the others. The smell of espresso lingers, out of place. On a small table near the window, forms have already been laid out, corners squared. The observer takes one and scans the header. It is not a police form. It asks for a name, a number, and a signature acknowledging receipt of support related to tonight's incident. No amount is listed. No explanation is attached. "Standard," the man says, as if anticipating a question. "Just so we can follow up." The observer looks back through the glass. Outside, the SUV pulls away smoothly, lights off, as if leaving a driveway. No one watches it go. The clerk clears his throat, unsure whether to speak. The observer feels the weight of the pen in their hand, heavier than it should be. Outside, the clipboard man closes his folder and smiles at the officers. "We'll handle the rest," he says. And for the first time since the lights began to flash, the observer understands that whatever happened on the street has already ended. And whatever comes next has already been decided. Inside the coffee shop, time loosens its grip. The observer notices it first in the way people stop checking their phones. The urgency that usually follows an accident, updates, calls, explanations, has been replaced by waiting. Not the anxious kind. The managed kind. A woman with a blazer and a careful smile moves between tables, offering water in paper cups. She does not introduce herself. She thanks people for their patience as though patience has already been agreed upon. "Someone will speak with you shortly," she says, repeating it with minor variations, the way an automated system changes tone to sound human. The observer watches the clerk behind the counter. His hands hover near the register, uncertain whether to clean, to serve, or to disappear. He wipes the same spot twice, then stops. No one tells him to reopen. No one tells him not to. Through the glass, the street scene rearranges itself. Cones shift. Tape tightens. The patrol car that was idling pulls forward, then stops again, as if unsure where it belongs. An officer leans toward another and speaks without covering his mouth. The observer can't hear the words, but the cadence is unmistakable, explanatory, not investigative. At the far table, a man in a hoodie whispers to the person beside him. The woman with the blazer appears instantly, placing a hand lightly on the table, not restraining, just anchoring. "We'll have a chance to go over everything," she says. "There's no rush." The man nods, chastened. The whisper stops. Forms are collected with quiet efficiency. The observer notices how the signatures are not reviewed, only counted. The stack is aligned, tapped twice against the table, then slid into a slim leather folder. No carbon copies. No receipts. A junior-looking officer enters the shop, hesitates, then stands near the door. He scans the room, eyes landing briefly on the observer before moving on. His radio crackles. He does not respond. The observer senses a hierarchy forming, invisible but firm. Those who arrived early now wait inside. Those who arrived late remain outside the tape, told there is nothing to see. A delivery cyclist argues briefly, then leaves, shaking his head. Someone important is missing, and that absence organizes everything. The woman with the blazer finally addresses the room. "Just so you know," she says, voice calm, "statements may not be necessary tonight. We want to make this as easy as possible." Easy for whom is left unsaid. The observer feels a subtle pressure, not coercion, but direction. A current pulling toward silence, toward acceptance of sequence. Outside, a tow truck arrives without sirens. The driver steps out, consults with the clipboard man, and nods. He does not inspect the car closely. He does not take photos. Inside, the clerk receives a text and glances up, startled. He pockets the phone quickly, as if caught doing something inappropriate. The observer wonders who is allowed to communicate right now, and who is not. A man in a suit enters the shop, removes his coat, and drapes it over a chair as if settling in. He speaks briefly with the woman in the blazer. She hands him the leather folder. He does not open it. Instead, he looks around the room, making brief eye contact with each person in turn. When his gaze reaches the observer, it lingers just long enough to register acknowledgement. "We appreciate your cooperation," he says. "There may be follow-up, but for now, you're free to go." Free is an interesting word, the observer thinks. People stand slowly, unsure whether to thank someone. A few do. The clerk unlocks the door again, relief flickering across his face before being replaced by confusion. He watches as the group disperses into the night, each person carrying less than they arrived with. The observer steps outside last. The street is almost normal now. The damaged car is gone. The tape is coming down. An officer laughs softly at something said off mic. The clipboard man is already walking away, phone to his ear, voice low. "Yes," he says. "We've got it contained." The observer turns to leave, and realizes no one ever asked what they saw. Not once. And as they take their first step away from the scene, a thought settles in with unsettling clarity. The accident is being erased in real time, and they have just been filed under optional. The call comes later than expected. Not that night. Not the next morning. Long enough for the observer to believe the silence might hold. It comes in the afternoon, during an ordinary moment, standing in line, scanning shelves, life reasserting itself with small demands. The number is unfamiliar but local. Not blocked. Not urgent. Professional. "Hi," the voice says, warm and unhurried. "This is just a follow-up regarding last night. Is now a good time?" The observer notices the phrasing immediately. Just a follow-up. Regarding last night. No mention of an accident. No names. No verbs that imply fault. They step aside, instinctively lowering their voice even before being asked. "Yes," they say. "Great. We're simply checking in to make sure everyone is okay," the voice continues. "And to clarify a few details so there's no confusion later." Clarify implies there is already a version. The observer listens as the caller summarizes events with remarkable efficiency. The street. The timing. The weather. The presence of emergency services. All accurate. All incomplete. "There was no need for you to give a formal statement at the scene," the voice says gently. "That was intentional. We didn't want to inconvenience anyone unnecessarily." Inconvenience, the observer thinks, has replaced accountability. A pause follows, not a mistake, but an opening. "If you did happen to notice anything unusual," the caller adds, "now would be the time to mention it." The observer searches their memory. Not for what happened, but for what has already been omitted. The SUV. The clipboards. The forms that were not police forms. They hesitate. The voice does not rush them. Of course, it says, if nothing stands out, that's completely fine. Most people don't remember much in these situations. The observer feels something subtle shift. Memory is being preemptively framed as unreliable. Silence, offered as relief. They say very little. Neutral things. What anyone could have seen. Perfect, the caller replies. That aligns with what we have. What we have. Before the observer can ask who is calling, the voice continues. One more thing, it says. As a courtesy, there will be a small support package sent your way. Transportation costs, time spent, that sort of thing. No action required on your part. There it is. Compensation before explanation. Closure before clarity. An email arrives moments later. Clean. Branded. The subject line reads, "thank you for your time." Asterisk. Attached is a document labeled acknowledgement of receipt. Not a contract. Not quite an agreement. Just a confirmation that assistance has been provided and no further involvement is anticipated. Anticipated by whom is unclear. The observer scrolls. The language is careful, rounded at the edges. No mention of responsibility. No denial of facts. Just an affirmation that everything has been handled appropriately. A line near the bottom stands out. Asterisk. This acknowledgement is standard and does not restrict your rights. Asterisk. It feels like a sentence designed to calm, not to inform. The amount is generous. Not enough to feel life-changing. Enough to feel intentional. The observer closes the email without responding. Later that evening, curiosity gets the better of them. They search local reports. There is a brief mention of a minor traffic incident with no outstanding concerns. No photos. No follow-up. Comments are disabled. The observer refreshes once. Twice. Nothing changes. They think about the others from the coffee shop. The man in the hoodie. The clerk. The cyclist who argued and left. Were they all called? Did they all hear the same version? Or different ones? As the observer sets their phone down, another message arrives, short, polite. Asterisk. Just checking in. Let us know if you have any questions. Asterisk. No signature. No pressure. Just presence. The observer realizes then that the story is no longer about what happened on the street. It is about which version survives, and who is being paid to forget the rest. The next development arrives not as contact, but as confirmation. The observer learns about it indirectly, through absence. The street where the accident occurred has been washed clean. Not literally, no crews, no hoses, but procedurally. No cones. No tape. No lingering patrol. The rhythm of traffic has returned as if uninterrupted. At City Hall, a public notice board updates overnight. New permits. Revised schedules. A line item about temporary roadway use quietly expires. No extension requested. It is only later, while waiting in line at a municipal office for an unrelated errand, that the observer overhears the word represented spoken with mild admiration. Two clerks talk softly behind the counter. Already retained, one says. Top tier. Fast, the other replies. Smart. They do not say lawyer. They do not need to. The observer stands still, paperwork in hand, listening to a conversation not meant for them. Names are avoided. Titles substituted. The wealthy individual remains abstract, present only as a gravitational force that organizes response. The first official letter arrives that afternoon. Not addressed to the observer directly, but copied to them. Their name appears halfway down the page, spelled correctly. A small courtesy. The letterhead is understated. White. Heavy paper. No logo large enough to feel proud of itself. It opens with reassurance. This correspondence is to confirm that our office has been engaged to ensure all parties are treated fairly and efficiently. Fairly and efficiently are presented as compatible goals. The observer reads on. The language grows more precise, more careful. Timelines are mentioned, not dates, but windows. Within the next few days. At an appropriate time. Pending review. Facts are referred to as preliminary impressions. At no point does the letter state what the observer may or may not say. Instead, it suggests. Should you be contacted by third parties, you may direct them to our office. Not must. May. The observer feels the shape of a corridor forming around them. Wide enough to walk through comfortably. Narrow enough to notice. A phone number is provided. A name. A direct extension. That evening, a voicemail appears from the same number. Calm. Professional. Just following up, the voice says. No urgency. We simply want to make sure everyone feels supported. Supported is doing a lot of work. The observer does not call back. Instead, they speak to someone else, carefully. A friend who works in insurance. Not involved. Not curious enough to ask too many questions. They describe the situation without names. The friend listens, then exhales slowly. That's early, they say. Very early. Is that unusual? The observer asks. It means they're not waiting, the friend replies. They're setting the frame. The phrase sticks. Setting the frame implies a picture already chosen. The observer thinks back to the first clipboard. The forms that weren't police forms. The acknowledgement that wasn't a contract. Each step arriving before the question it answered. Later, scrolling through news again, the observer notices a small update. The original mention of the incident has been edited. The wording is softer. A sentence removed. No correction notice appears. The observer wonders who requested the change, and how. A second letter arrives the next morning. Shorter. More direct. Please find enclosed an advance on anticipated inconvenience. A check. Larger than the first amount. Still no explanation. Still no request. Just assumption. The observer places it on the table and does not touch it. The paper feels heavier than it should. For the first time, a question surfaces clearly. If counsel has arrived before facts, then facts are no longer the priority. And as the observer looks at the untouched envelope, they realize the balance has shifted again. The story is now protected. And anyone outside that protection is standing alone. The meeting is offered as a convenience. Not summoned. Not required. Simply available, should the observer find it helpful. A neutral office downtown. Flexible hours. Coffee provided. The phrasing is careful enough to feel generous. The observer delays responding for a day, then another. Silence stretches, but it does not harden. No reminders. No warnings. Only a brief follow-up email that reads, whenever works for you. Eventually, the observer agrees. The office occupies the upper floors of a building that does not advertise itself. The lobby is quiet, recently renovated, designed to absorb sound. A receptionist greets the observer by name without checking the screen. You're expected, she says, smiling. Upstairs, the conference room is glass-walled but private. Frosted just enough. The city beyond it is blurred into abstraction, motion without detail. Two people are already seated. Both stand when the observer enters. Introductions are exchanged. Titles offered but not emphasized. One legal. One advisory. The difference is subtle but important. They do not ask the observer to recount the accident. Instead, they speak first. They describe how these situations typically unfold. How misunderstandings can escalate unnecessarily. How public narratives sometimes drift away from facts, causing harm to people who did not intend it. The observer listens, aware that intention has quietly replaced outcome. We're very conscious of impact, one of them says. On everyone involved. A folder slides across the table. Thicker than before. Tabs visible inside. This isn't for signing today, the other adds quickly. Just information. Inside are timelines, not of the accident, but of response. Who arrived when? Which agencies were notified? Which procedures were followed? Everything is orderly. Logical. Almost comforting. What's missing is equally precise. No mention of the SUV. No mention of the early forms. No mention of the moment when the wealthy individual left before questions were asked. The observer flips through the pages slowly. We've found, the legal one says, that clarity helps prevent complications later. Complications sounds like a warning without threat. The advisory voice joins in. And of course, if there's anything you're unsure about, we can address it now rather than letting it turn into stress. Stress, the observer realizes, is being positioned as the real risk. A document appears at the back of the folder. Short. 2 pages. Labeled confidentiality acknowledgement. Not an NDA, technically. No penalties listed. No threats. Just language about discretion. About professionalism. About refraining from speculative statements that could misrepresent events. We include this as standard, the legal voice says. Mostly to protect you. Protect you from whom is not specified. The observer feels the pressure sharpen, not overt, not forceful, but directional. A sense that there is a correct path and several less comfortable ones. We're not asking you to change anything you believe, the advisory voice says gently. Only to be mindful of how narratives form. The check from earlier is referenced casually. Framed as part of a broader effort to close the loop. If there are any additional needs, they add, we're happy to address them now. The observer understands then, this is the moment of calibration. Not guilt. Not innocence. Alignment. They look at the confidentiality page again. The language is smooth. The pen beside it is heavy, matte black, placed carefully within reach. Outside the glass wall, someone walks past, blurred into anonymity. The city continues, indifferent. The observer sets the pen down without touching it. I need time, they say. Both nod immediately. No surprise. No resistance. Of course, the legal voice replies. Take all the time you need. The folder is closed, but not reclaimed. As the observer stands to leave, the advisory voice adds one final sentence, almost casually. Just remember, once this moves forward publicly, it becomes much harder to protect anyone. Anyone. The elevator ride down is silent. The lobby feels colder than before. And as the observer steps back onto the street, the weight of the choice settles fully into place. Silence is no longer just an option. It is being priced, formalized, and politely waiting for acceptance. The observer does nothing. That becomes the problem. Days pass without response. The folder remains unopened on the table at home, exactly where it was placed, as if touching it might activate something irreversible. The checks remain uncashed. Their presence begins to feel conspicuous, like unattended luggage. Silence, it turns out, is not neutral. The first sign arrives as paperwork. A thin envelope from the city, forwarded automatically after an address update the observer does not remember filing. Inside is a notice, a routine request for clarification related to a traffic incident. The language is impersonal, procedural. A box is checked next to optional response. Optional, the observer now knows, is a flexible word. They read it twice. There is no deadline listed. Just a phone number and a reference code. When they call, the line routes through 3 departments before landing on a voicemail. The message thanks them for their interest and assures them the matter is already under review. Already. The observer hangs up and feels a subtle displacement, like stepping into a room where a conversation has been ongoing without them. Later that day, another email arrives. This one from the advisory contact. Brief. Friendly. Asterisk just wanted to make sure nothing got lost. Let us know if you'd like help coordinating with the city. Asterisk. Help coordinating implies the city is not acting independently. That evening, a local news segment runs. Not about the accident. About traffic safety initiatives. A passing reference is made to a recent, minor incident that demonstrates the effectiveness of rapid response protocols. No names. No footage. A graphic appears showing a clean timeline with reassuring arrows. The observer recognizes the sequence. It is the same one from the folder. They begin to notice small inconsistencies. A neighbor mentions seeing a post online that has since disappeared. A coworker asks, casually, whether the observer was around that thing downtown, then shrugs it off when the answer is vague. The narrative is settling, like wet cement. The observer opens the folder for the first time. Inside, the confidentiality page has been annotated. Sticky flags mark certain paragraphs. Helpful notes in the margin explain how these provisions are commonly understood and rarely invoked. Rarely invoked is not never. At the bottom of the page, a line they hadn't noticed before feels newly legible. Asterisk this acknowledgement reflects the parties' mutual intent to avoid unnecessary escalation. Asterisk. Escalation from what to what? A knock at the door interrupts the thought. Not loud. Not urgent. 2 quick taps, then waiting. Through the peephole, the observer sees a uniform. Not police. Municipal. The kind worn by people who deliver notices and collect confirmations. When the door opens, the man smiles politely and holds out a tablet. Just verifying receipt, he says. Nothing to worry about. The screen displays the city notice. A digital checkbox waits patiently. The observer hesitates. It's optional, they say. The man nods. Absolutely. This just notes that you've seen it. Seen is different from agreed. The observer taps the box. Appreciate it, the man says, already stepping back. This helps keep everything moving. Moving where, the observer wonders, as the door closes. Their phone buzzes almost immediately. A new message. Unknown number. Asterisk thanks for confirming. We'll take it from here. Asterisk. No signature. No explanation. The observer sits down, suddenly aware that records are being finalized without them. That their role has shifted again, from witness, to participant, to administrative footnote. And as the quiet returns, heavier than before, one thought becomes unavoidable. The system is now documenting compliance. And dissent, if it comes later, will look like deviation, not truth. The acknowledgement arrives disguised as closure. An email, precise and courteous, lands mid-morning. The subject line is neutral to the point of sterility, asterisk confirmation of resolution status. Asterisk. The observer opens it slowly. The message thanks them for their cooperation, confirms that records have been updated, and notes that no further action is required at this time. It uses language that suggests completion without ever naming what has been completed. At the bottom, a single sentence stands apart. Asterisk, we appreciate your professionalism. Asterisk. Professionalism, the observer realizes, has become a synonym for quiet. They scroll down. Attached is a PDF labeled Final Administrative Summary. It is stamped. Signed. Time-stamped. The accident now exists as a closed loop. The summary lists agencies consulted, protocols followed, determinations reached. Each item is phrased as consensus, even when no discussion was ever had. The observer's name appears once, under a section titled * Peripheral Parties. Asterisk. Peripheral feels deliberate. There is no place to add a comment. No margin. No reply field. Later that day, the observer runs into someone else from the coffee shop, the man in the hoodie. It happens by chance, at a crosswalk several blocks away from the original scene. They recognize each other immediately. Shared experience has that effect. For a moment, neither speaks. Then the man smiles thinly. Looks like it all got handled, he says. The observer nods. Yeah, they reply. Handled. They wait, both of them, for something more to be said. Nothing comes. I got a package, the man adds, lowering his voice. Pretty generous. The observer says nothing. Figured it wasn't worth dragging out, the man continues. You know how these things go. Do they? The light changes. The man steps forward, then hesitates. You didn't say anything, did you? He asks, not accusing, just checking alignment. No, the observer says. The relief on the man's face is immediate, unguarded. Good, he says. Smart. Smart, the observer thinks, has replaced honest. That evening, another document arrives by courier. No envelope. Just a folder with a cover note. Asterisk for your records. Asterisk. Inside is the confidentiality acknowledgement, now countersigned. No request for the observer's signature. Just confirmation that it has been noted. Not agreed to. Not disputed. Noted. The observer understands then that silence has been formalized retroactively. That the system does not require consent to proceed, only the absence of resistance. They search the document for expiration dates. There are none. They search for enforcement language. It is soft, almost philosophical. Phrases like mutual understanding and shared interest repeat with quiet insistence. A final clause catches their eye. Asterisk public commentary at this stage would likely introduce confusion. Asterisk. Likely, not prohibited. But confusion, the observer knows, is something institutions punish indirectly. Outside, a siren passes somewhere far away. Not connected. Not relevant. The observer sits with the folder open, aware that the window for unstructured truth has closed. What remains now must pass through forms, counsel, and timing. And in that stillness, another realization settles in, heavy, irreversible. Silence is no longer just absence of speech. It has become an active condition, monitored and maintained. The doubt does not arrive loudly. It surfaces in fragments, misplaced moments that return without invitation. A reflection in a window that resembles flashing lights. The soft click of a pen that sounds like a car door closing. The observer finds themselves reconstructing the scene not as it happened, but as it has been recorded. This is new. Memory, once private, now feels audited. They notice how often the phrase already resolved appears in conversation. A coworker uses it casually after recognizing the location. A neighbor repeats it after reading something online. Each time, the words land with the weight of consensus. Resolved implies that questioning would be regression. One evening, the observer receives an invitation. Not official. Social. A small gathering hosted by someone loosely connected, someone who knows someone. The message frames it as coincidence. Asterisk, you should come by. A few of us were around that night. Asterisk. Around, not involved. The room is warm. Drinks are offered quickly. Names circulate without context. The observer recognizes two faces from the coffee shop, another from the street. Conversation moves carefully, orbiting the incident without touching it. So strange how fast things move now, someone says, meaning nothing and everything. Systems work, another replies. If you let them. Laughter follows, light but rehearsed. At some point, the advisory voice appears, not in person, but in echo. Someone mentions how the legal side was really proactive. Someone else nods, impressed. They took care of people, a woman says. That counts for something. The observer feels the room tilt subtly, as if a conclusion is being tested. Later, near the door, one of the guests pulls the observer aside. Friendly. Familiar enough. You've been quiet, they say. Everything okay? The observer hesitates. Just long enough. The smile tightens. I just mean, you seem like someone who thinks things through. That's rare. A compliment, positioned as expectation. There's no upside to stirring things up, the guest adds, softly. Not now. Not when it's settled. Settled again. On the walk home, the observer's phone buzzes. A message from the advisory contact. Asterisk, hope you're well. Just wanted to remind you that our offer to assist remains open. Asterisk. Assist with what is left unsaid. The observer stops under a streetlight and rereads it. The light hums faintly overhead, steady, indifferent. For the first time, they imagine speaking publicly. Not dramatically. Not accusatory. Just accurately. They imagine the response. Not outrage. Not denial. Clarification. Statements issued. Language refined. Motives questioned politely. The observer reframed as confused, emotional, mistaken. They imagine their name appearing again, this time under a different heading. Asterisk, inconsistent account. Asterisk. The pressure sharpens, not as fear, but as calculation. At home, they open their laptop and begin to write. Not a statement. Notes. Details that did not make it into the record. The SUV. The early departure. The forms without logos. They save the file, then hesitate. A notification appears in the corner of the screen. Another message. Same number. Asterisk, just checking in. We noticed increased online interest today. Let us know if you'd like guidance. Asterisk. Not if they plan to speak. Asterisk, when. Asterisk. The observer closes the laptop without saving again. They realize then that the choice is no longer between silence and speech. It is between isolation and alignment. And as they sit in the quiet, phone face down, the final pressure becomes clear. Speaking is still possible. But it will cost far more than money. The cost presents itself gradually, as if testing thresholds. It begins with small losses that can be explained away. A meeting that is postponed, then quietly cancelled. An email thread that goes unanswered, not abruptly, but collectively, each participant assuming someone else will reply. The observer notices how often their name is omitted now. Not removed. Simply unnecessary. They receive a call from a journalist late one evening. Independent. Polite. Careful. I'm working on a piece about procedural inconsistencies, the journalist says. Nothing sensational. I was told you might have been nearby. Nearby again. The observer asks how they got the number. A pause. Public records, the journalist replies. Peripheral parties are easier to find than principals. Peripheral has traveled far. They arrange to meet in a neutral place. A cafe across town. No cameras. No recording devices placed openly. The journalist asks measured questions. The observer answers just as carefully. No accusations. No conclusions. Only sequence. The journalist listens, nodding occasionally. They write nothing down. At the end, they say, if I publish this, it won't change the official record. But it will complicate it. Complicate, the observer knows, is the opposite of resolved. 2 hours after returning home, the advisory contact calls. Not upset. Not urgent. I wanted to give you a courtesy heads up, they say. There's been an inquiry. Inquiry implies surveillance without naming it. We're not concerned, the voice continues. But timing matters. Narratives harden quickly once they're public. The observer does not deny the meeting. The line goes quiet for a moment. When the voice returns, it is still calm, but narrower. Just so you're aware, they say, public engagement would reopen matters that are currently closed. That tends to affect everyone involved. Everyone again. The next day, the observer's employer requests a meeting. Not disciplinary. Not hostile. Just cautious. We've been contacted, the manager says, folding their hands. Nothing formal. Just awareness. Awareness has consequences without paperwork. They asked whether this situation might become distracting, the manager adds. I said I didn't think so. The observer thanks them. Walking home afterward, the observer feels the accumulation, not of threats, but of friction. Each interaction adds resistance. Each choice costs a little more effort. That evening, a final message arrives from the journalist. Asterisk, I'm moving forward. You don't need to be named. Asterisk. Anonymous is protection, but also erasure. The observer looks at the screen for a long time. They understand now that speaking does not mean being heard. It means being repositioned. Reduced to a variable that can be adjusted, contextualized, outweighed. They think of the others. The man in the hoodie. The clerk. How easily relief had replaced curiosity. The check still sits in the drawer, untouched. The observer opens it, then closes it again. The choice is no longer abstract. It is measured in relationships, credibility, access. In how many doors will close quietly, without explanation. And as midnight passes, the observer recognizes the final transaction taking shape. Truth is still allowed. But only if they are willing to pay for it alone. The article appears on a Tuesday morning. Not on the front page. Not shared widely at first. It sits where serious things often do, behind a neutral headline, framed as analysis rather than accusation. The language is cautious. Names are withheld. Timelines are compared, not challenged. The observer reads it alone. Their words are there, reshaped. Accurate, but distanced. Stripped of tone. Presented as one possible account among others. By noon, a response is issued. Not a rebuttal. A clarification. It thanks the journalist for their interest and reiterates that the matter was handled according to established procedures. It emphasizes cooperation, professionalism, and the absence of outstanding concerns. The phrase appears again, resolved appropriately. By evening, the article is harder to find. Not removed. Just buried beneath newer content, algorithmically deprioritized, contextually softened by links to official statements. The observer receives no further calls. No warnings. No follow-ups. That, too, is deliberate. Days pass. Life resumes its shape, but not its texture. Conversations remain polite. Opportunities remain just out of reach. Nothing breaks. Nothing improves. The observer notices how often people avoid the subject entirely, as if acknowledging it would require choosing sides they do not want to see. The check remains uncashed. The folder remains closed. Eventually, the observer returns to the street where it all began. There is no marker. No sign. Traffic flows uninterrupted. Pedestrians cross without slowing. The space holds nothing. And yet, standing there, the observer understands something with quiet certainty. The accident was never the event. The event was the reallocation of consequence. Money did not erase what happened. It reorganized it. Moving responsibility into documents. Moving doubt into individuals. Moving silence into professionalism. What remains is not justice or injustice. Not truth or lie. What remains is a system that functioned exactly as designed. And an observer who now knows the cost of noticing. They turn away and walk on, carrying nothing visible, nothing provable. Only the awareness that in some accidents, the damage is not measured in injuries, but in how easily the world agrees to look somewhere else.